Three, two, one. Good afternoon. This is Animal Uncontrol. Welcome to the voice chat. These calls are recording for uploading to social media, and by joining a call, you're consenting to being recorded. Anyone wishing to join a call should email me at animaluncontrol@gmail.com, and I will reply with instructions. Today's topic is dogsbite.org. Dogsbite.org is a primary nonprofit organization dedicated to putting the safety of humans before dogs, and the principal source of information on this topic that is not owned, controlled, or funded by dog breeders, dog advocacy, veterinarian, or animal welfare groups. They do not receive government or corporate funding. They rely on donations from the public and supporters, people like you. And I'll add that I am a supporter, and I encourage listeners to contribute also. You can go to the site. We could get into that in a minute, show you like where to go. And for me to contribute really says something, because I'm a really cheap bastard. So the fact that I'm contributing by itself says a lot. So joining me is Colleen from dogsbite.org. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me on as a guest.
Yeah. I've been wanting to talk to you for so long. This is going to be awesome. Anyway, whenever I have somebody on, particularly the first time, the first question is, tell us a bit about yourself and what motivated you to pursue this interest.
Okay, like many people, I think I was just going along in life, living my life. I had started, I was a .com 1.0 in Seattle at that time. And I'd gotten involved in the Obama campaigns. My first time to do any grassroots type work. And I realized that that was fun. I liked it. So then I'm out jogging that one day in Seattle in June. And I was attacked by this leashed pit bull. It was a horrifying experience. I think it was only like 4 or 5 seconds long. It attacked the way we consistently see these dogs attack. So jump to the chest, I fly backwards onto the cement, and it bites the first thing it can, which fortunately in my case was my forearm, because as you know, you don't control that, right? They're just,
Yep.
Yeah, just boom, there it was. It was right in front of my face. And so I could see his teeth coming in and out of my forearm, a few inches from my face, and shaking so hard. I didn't seem real to me. And for whatever reason, that dog let go. And that gave me a chance to sort of, roll away and sprint down the street and start screaming, call 911. And I was at that time just a few blocks from the Regional Trauma Center in Seattle, which serves like a 5-state area. And so as I was screaming, call 911, I mean, a doctor obviously, lived nearby. He's running out. He's testing my nerves and my fingers within seconds of that attack. I mean, it's amazing. It was on Father's Day. There was a firehouse, about a block and a half away. So they were coming down. And everybody was just like, I can't believe this. I mean, that's unusual. Okay. So I got excellent service, fast service. I was shipped into Harborview. I was definitely, that was an experience being in one of those hospitals too, because there's armed guards and there's all sorts of things going on. You're just like down there waiting in this like basement room to see if it's broken or not, if they're gonna have to do surgery or not. So that was, it wasn't a good day to like call my dad and tell him what happened.
Yeah, happy Father's Day. Oh, by the way, I got mauled by a dog,
I've just been mauled by a pit bull. And so anyways, I got out after a couple days, and I was really loosened, and really it's like my adrenaline was still going, right? Days after the attack. And so I'm online and I'm thinking to myself, these dogs are dangerous. I already knew that. And I don't know where, it's not like I had read, well, maybe I had read something. I don't recall, but it wasn't like at the top of my sort of knowledge that it just was back there that this was sort of I have some hesitancy towards the breed, right? So I start looking around, and back then in 2007, everything was a forum board. There was no social media. And so I was going to these pit bull boards, game dog forum boards. What's going on? And it was be like, pit bulls are nanny dogs. And all of this propaganda, they would have point by point propaganda. And I thought, what is that? This is not what I know. I'd never even seen the propaganda before. And so then I continue researching because I'm in Seattle. So San Francisco had passed a mandatory pit bull spay neuter law in 2005, I think it was. So it had come into effect in 2006. So it's sort of right around the time. And so I started finding information out about San Francisco and, of course, the Diane Whipple. And so those attacks. And then, of course, quickly I was led to Denver because Denver had some online documentation about their ban and why they banned. And so that's sort of when I said, oh my God, so I'm not crazy. These are not nanny dogs. Okay. And so I sort of pursued, I did a bunch of research on the subject and also with Seattle Stats. And so I sort of developed this like 20-page white paper for Seattle, for City Council. I had hoped that Seattle might take the direction of a San Francisco, but City Council said no. I decided instead of throwing that paper away that I was going to put it online, and that became basically version 1.0 of the site. And that's how it all got started.
Wow, that's quite a story. I mean, I often say that everybody or almost everybody is a very, very personal reason for being in this space. Because you just didn't wake up one morning thinking, what should I do today? I know I'm going to start hating on pit bulls. That's what I'm going to do, or dogs generally, or dog culture. No, I mean, it's like I said, it's very, very personal reason. And that's why, people get into this space. And it also, it's something for, I'll call them the adversary to consider, is that what they're doing is by allowing these types of incidents to continue, they're actually creating their own opposition. They're like spawning their own adversary, which is, people like you and I, for example.
Right.
So yeah, that's quite a, so you collate. Well, I mean, a part of your site, you have a blog and you collate primarily fatal dog attacks, some really bad maulings, particularly if they make the news, and some other, incidences. But how do you source those incidents? Like, actually, I just skipped over the other question, but we can just go with this one. Like, what's a criteria for blogging something like that? How do you source those things?
Okay, so we have a collection method that's underneath the citations tab, and that's going to go into, that's probably, if you print that out, it's at least 5 pages. So that's going to tackle a lot of these questions. If you're looking at it right now, or you could link to it. And then, of course, for each fatality, we have citations for every news article that we collect based upon it. Now, as far as the criteria goes, many years ago, what was it? Probably around 2009 is when I really sort of locked down on about 9 or 10 different Google alert search terms. Which is like, fatal dog bite, dog kills baby, so none of them are breed specific either, because I wanted all of them, right?
Yep.
So and those have stayed in place, and it's been pretty, again, we can only look to what are the CDC numbers at the end of each year. They had 30 deaths. How many did we have? We had 30 deaths. So, we know that they're not exactly the same victims, because that's underlying cause of death for CDC. And we also take, to qualify as a fatal dog mauling in our stats, it's typically severe injury plus death. Death is usually usually within 24 hours, but sometimes it's a couple of days, maybe a week later. It depends. So
yeah,
if they're hospitalized, or they go into hospice and you don't hear about them, and then and then the children tell the media a little bit later. And so yeah, we're not strictly underlying cause of death, and I don't think we should be, because our basic parameter, was it a vicious attack? Did they receive severe injury, and did they die?
Yep.
So if it's, it could be vicious, and, he grabbed his small dog away from this dog that was attacking it, and it bit his thumb off, and then he died of a heart attack. So that actually doesn't qualify. We're looking at like that. People would say that's severe injury, and it is.
Yeah.
But typically, we're going to go it's multiple bites in multiple anatomical regions, and it's a very severe mauling too. Not minor.
Right. So yeah, well, if you need some things, I mean, a dog attack can be, fatal. If it it'd still be the proximate cause, like if it triggers the heart attack, say, like, would they have had a heart attack if the dog hadn't attacked them?
Correct.
But then you're right, you get into this, it's kind of then it becomes sort of subjective, like COVID deaths. Like if somebody gets COVID and dies, well, you could argue, yeah, there was obviously a contributing factor, but they also had high blood pressure. They were 100 pounds overweight. They had out of control diabetes and congestive heart failure, right? So when you mix all that together, it's like, okay, maybe the dog attack, let's say there was a dog attack victim, maybe the dog was 20% of the cause, and not, because you're talking about where it was clearly 100% the reason, not a partial cause. Yes.
Right. And we keep those cases on file too. So if I ever need to, so when we hear about those cases, we collect those cases, and they're not included in statistics, but we have them in case someone questions us about it, or in case we want to revisit it at a later time. So if perhaps, we think differently 5 years from now, I don't know, but I think it's good for us to have them all, as many as possible, and certainly in order to exclude them.
Right.
I once had some hostile media contact me and like ask me all these questions. And I was like, well, if you scroll to the bottom, it says excluded in our statistics.
Yeah.
And then there's like 5 or 6 cases, because she was only asking me about the 5 or 6. I'm like, I don't know how I can make my language clear.
Yeah.
I mean, if it says they're excluded, I mean, in big letters, I mean, so yeah. So I mean, it is helpful to have those two, just to know that they're there and are accessible, and no, they're not included. So.
Yeah, I would be interested to look at that. Actually, I wasn't aware of that, but I would, not just but myself, some of our peers would be interested to look at that, because we had a conversation on here recently about loss of life expectancy, in years. For example, say where the, from any cause, right? Say from smoking. Like if you're a smoker, it'll knock an average of 10 years off your life expectancy on average. So if you look at it in this case, you could say, okay, these folks survived at least initially, but you got to think they probably still had some loss of life expectancy. It's probably difficult to say how much. And as you noted, the media and probably even the culture at large is very, very hostile to this. They're going to say, oh, no, that wasn't because of the dog. You're wrong.
Yes. There are cases. I mean, I was just thinking about some of the memorable cases, and there was the one several years ago where it's always this beautiful blonde girl who is a pit bull advocate and is killed and eaten by her pit bulls, right? That sets off the crazy, intense rumor mongering, right?
Yep.
Just would not accept that it wasn't a murder, it wasn't a bear, and the poor sheriff's department had to give 2 press conferences to try to clear up the information. And finally, he's like, it doesn't even matter how much evidence I show. Some people are just not going to be notified.
They're not going to believe it. They're not going to, because, well, a lot of people have been conditioned to believe. And of course, the pit bull folks are the craziest, but many folks have been conditioned to believe that, a dog can't do something like this.
Correct.
It just can't either that, or either something else did it, or it was a fault of something else, or the outcome was somehow justified. Victim blaming is, rampant in this space also. So, they're going to do that. And yeah, and anybody, you're right. It doesn't matter how much evidence you give. They're not going to. They're either going to believe it or write it off as the fault of something else. It's never the dog or the owner. They say, oh, it's not the dog's fault. It's irresponsible owners or whatever. But they don't blame the owner. When something actually happens, they don't blame the owner either. They blame the victim or some third party cause like the weather.
It's pretty amazing. And you gotta love it. It's like, blame the owner. That's their own slogan, right? They're the ones that say blame the owner. Don't blame the breed. And we can't blame the owners. Okay?
Right.
Most
we can't. Well, that's the thing is I don't know if you listen to all my monologues, but that's one of their bait and switch routines. They'll say, well, more owner accountability is required. And actually, I believe so also that, as long as any of these are owned by anybody, owner accountability. I mean, if they ban everything except Chihuahuas, like maybe not, but as long as these things exist in society at all, yes, the owners need to be held accountable. You're criminally liable, I believe. But they don't want to. The thing is, they don't want to do that, right? As soon as you do that, they say, "Oh no, you can't blame them for something the dog did." Now it's the dog's fault again. So just sort of, it's like a tennis match. It just keeps going back and forth.
It does, and I think about what progress has been made since I started. I don't know. I mean, times have changed. They're not the same. Social media, politics. I mean, the world has changed. But it's hard for me to gauge how this particular argument has changed, gotten better, gotten worse, gotten more murky. It's I know dog ownership has increased.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a difficult thing. I do believe that protocols have changed. So I'm one of those people who will listen to Broadcastify, to the audio logs when there's fatalities and very serious attacks. And also we do FOIAs, so we'll get multiple years from, say, a coroner's office, and we're looking at these, cause of death, canine mauling. So it's not just dog bites, right? I mean, canine mauling is a cause of death today. That I don't think that definition was true, 15 years ago.
Oh, really? That's interesting, because that was the other, question. I skipped over this one, but I didn't mean to. Are there statutory reporting requirements for this sort of thing, and not just killings, but say dog bites? Because you always hear that statistic thrown around. Well, there's 4.7 million dog bites in the United States every year, but I've been hearing that same number over and over again for a long time. So, I mean, is there a statutory reporting requirement for something like that? I mean, like, for example, if a dog attack, like in your case, the dog attack victim winds up in the ER, does medical staff have to report that to some sort of like governing body? Similarly, if police are called or animal control are called, are they obligated to report that? Like they would, let's say, for a firearm death or a traffic fatality or something like that.
Well, there's going to be different. So with dog bites, there's that rabies threat, right? Even though we know it's not a really big threat here. So dog bites are often statutory requirements in a state. So while every jurisdiction can do what they want to do in a lot of ways, at the end of the day, those bite stats have to be forwarded up to a state level. Mm-hmm. Stats is maybe the wrong word. Because there's the only stat there is how many bites. It's not about how the severity of injury. It's not about a dog breed. It's just bite because it's rabies.
Yeah.
So that is true. But I think that if particular hospitals are part of the surveillance system for CDC, mm-hmm. Those numbers are automatically tracked. So that's how we get non-fatal dog bite injuries, is through WSQARS, CDC. So I would imagine, say, like the Harborview that I was at, which is a regional trauma center, that would be under the surveillance system. But not every hospital And so I think that there's sort of an estimate would have to be made, and that 4.7 million number, I think, is from in and around 2000.
Yeah, it's a long time. It's probably more than I would expect. It's more than that now, just because.
Yeah.
I mean, by a pretty significant margin, I would think.
Well, the CDC came out with another one in 2008. Some was it called? Are dog bites still something? They did a telephone call survey, and then they extrapolated out all these numbers from it. And so I think that was after the 4.7. Maybe that's why you hear 4.7 and 4.5. Are dog bites still a problem? Was the study. And so, yeah, I think it's really hard to get a sense of that. I mean, there are, let's see, I think California, there's a couple of states that probably are going to release some data every so many years that say on a state level, this is how many bites there were.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you have to be working at a very local level because local governments collect things differently. Some will collect breeds, some will not. Some will collect dog attacks, some will not. And so that is really sort of the problem. And the same exists with police. So police have all these different jurisdictions. So you'd end up having to FOIA all of them individually to find out about a single city. And let's just say it was only 50,000 people. Let's say 100,000. You know, you're going to have to send out quite a few FOIAs, and if there's anybody outside the city, then that's going to be county, so unincorporated. So it's a lot of work to try to get an accurate idea about a community in this area, particularly if you want more than bites, like say you want severity or something like that. That's going to be much harder.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're right. It doesn't really give you any indication of, the severity of the attack or the circumstances or I guess I'll call it the qualifications of the attack. Like in what happened to you, I would qualify that as an aggravated assault, right? Because you're in a public space. It's not your dog. You're not interacting with it, right? And it just, boom, attacks you, right? It's almost like a mugging in a sense. It's an aggravated assault. So like one thing, I'd like to see is it would be interesting to get statistics on something like that. It's like, okay, well, again, on the qualifications of the nature of these attacks or dog bites. Because like I've said before, if somebody pulls the dog's ear and the dog snaps at him, that's really not that interesting.
Right.
It's just, I just don't find that, because anything with a mouth can bite you. Like sometimes somebody will come into my space and say, well, I was trimming my cat's nails and it bit me. And it's like, well, then take it to a groomer. Like, what do you want me to tell you? But, you can see there's a very big distinction between something like that and say what happened to you or pretty much all the people that you report on your blog. Because that's what's interesting to me is because, I personally, I come at this more from a public safety and public health perspective, but really just a civil and human rights perspective also. Like, we have a right to use our public spaces in peace. And these murder mud people basically have taken that from us. So, and, I want it back. You want it back. We want it back. That's one important aspect of this. So yeah, that's interesting. You're right. And getting, that's the thing is people are always throwing statistics around, but I've been bringing up recently, it's like we don't really, the numbers really aren't that good because of what you just indicated. We don't have, say, a national reporting requirement for these things. We don't categorize them very well or perhaps at all. So we don't know. We know it's a problem.
That's why we collect the regional level 1 trauma studies. So they indicate a region usually, and a larger area, and because we've got people being flown in, so forth and so on, for level 1 treatment, and so you can get a sense of if that's what's happening at a level 1 in Georgia, New York, Washington State, and Texas, then I think that's an indicator of that's happening everywhere, in the country. It's just that, I mean,
Sure.
obviously there's only a small percentage of dog attacks are going to be that severe, right? Probably
Right.
whatever that is, 6%, 5%, something like that. But still, that is a count. That is something. That's important data, and we have hospitalization data, right? But that's still, a lot of dog bites get infected. So it may not have started as a hospital demanding overnight stay initially, but you went home and it got infected. Now you're in the hospital for 3 days, right?
Yep.
And so that's not quite it. Hospitalizations are really important, but they're not. I mean, I've known multiple people bitten by dogs that went home, got infected, and then ended up back there, and they wouldn't have said, "Oh my God, it was this severe attack." And but infection's bad. It's like 1 out of 5, 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so that's, the hospitalizations are a little bit odd too, and I'm trying to think of some states are going to be better than others. I don't know, like Delaware, has one animal control. The state runs the animal control department in Delaware, so that state probably has some pretty interesting numbers, right? As opposed to having all these different jurisdictions with different animal control. So that state probably has some stuff. Virginia has one of the few states with a dangerous dog database. I think they've got some interesting, numbers that they know the influx of animals coming in, coming out. So they're an advanced state, I call them. The rest of the states aren't that way. But yeah, it's hard to, it is hard to get, it's hard to think about how much cost goes into it too. So all these debates about, BSL and other things, how much it costs to enforce, and what we really don't know is, what's not been looked at is animal control, police, paramedics, hospital. What is the cost of one severe attack, or one severe attack and then a minor attack, and look at, there were 2,000 dog bites this year. I mean, there'd be a way to sort of understand cost if some agency was hired to do that, right?
Right.
There would be a way to analyze that. And it's too bad that hasn't been done, because there's definitely quite a bit of cost involved there.
Yeah, and you have indirect costs also, because a victim, perhaps even in your cases, you have, productivity losses and other economic losses relating to, the dog attack. Like, if, for example, if they're in the hospital for a week, they're not working. They probably, then they, if they have kids, and they have to, make arrangements to have the kids look, you know what I'm saying? It's like, there's all these, it's very, they can be very, very expensive. Even in most people just think, well, it's the medical cost, but it's perhaps just the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, they're very, very expensive. Sometimes, I think that, in a way, it matters, obviously. It's interesting. But I look at it, from a perspective of it, I think it really shouldn't be happening regardless. It's, we shouldn't have these things in the community, whether it costs X amount or Y amount in terms of, actual damage. I would say, because you can point to, say, okay, what's the threshold for that type, for some kind of restriction, right? Or for whatever it could be, you just want to ban them completely or impose insurance requirements or whatever. But say, okay, what's the threshold for doing so? But I'm really looking into, what are the ethics of, bringing a murder mutt into the community and turning it loose to attack people? I'd say that's not a good, it's not something we want. And really, how much it costs downstream is interesting. It matters, but that really, I'm more interested in sort of, the ethics of allowing this to happen in the first place.
Right.
So, that's, and I think, what you're asking for as an aside, maybe I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but, what the BSL folks ask for is, I mean, it's not 100% reasonable, it's 500% reasonable. You go into like, where, how, when I got into the space and I started looking into this, and I started doing my due diligence, and one thing that was interesting to me, I live in Florida, was that, the Miami pit bull restriction, which was ground zero of a massive political battle that raged for 20 years. I mean, it was just epic. I guess, they were constantly trying to get the ban repealed, the pit bull activists. And probably even just general, dog people, dog lovers also, but trying to get this ban repealed, and all the rhetoric used, to oppose the ban. They said, well, it's fascist, it's bigoted, it's racist, it's communist, it's unconstitutional, right? And I'm saying, you can see I'm sitting, I'm having the massive face palm, and I'm thinking, really? It's so my thought was, when I started doing due diligence on this, and I focus on more than just dangerous dogs, but I started thinking, okay, what is kind of like that, right? And a lot of times, the pit bull aficionados will point to, they'll say things like, well, if you ban pit bulls, they're coming for your car next, right? It's communism. Or, yeah, what are you going to do next? Gas the Jews, you Nazi cretin. And, but I said, okay, what is it more comparable to? Right. I said, what is kind of like this in society? So I said, okay, how do we manage, to look at it holistically, how do we manage populations of domestic animals in society that people either like or find useful, like horses or cats or goats, sheep, and pigs, and so forth? And, the conclusion I came to was that, the threshold for restricting something like that is very, very low, meaning that state and local governments, at least, have broad powers in restricting the keeping of animals, which is why you can't have a pet elephant in your suburban backyard, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking, okay, and nobody, regardless, it's a political issue, but it's not partisan. I think, and pretty much everybody, regardless of their political positioning or inclination, agrees, yes, at least these lower jurisdictions at least have the power to restrict the keeping of animals, particularly in crowded communities like cities and suburbs and so forth. Right. So you think that's why you can have a house cat as a pet but not a mountain lion, or an iguana but not a crocodile, right? It makes sense. But it seems like that the kind of arguments they are using only come up when you're talking about breeds of dogs. Mm-hmm. That, for example, nobody's saying that it's, communism that I can't have, pet mountain lion, or at least not without. I did some due diligence on that. It's actually, in theory, it's possible, but there's this enormous pile of special permits I would have to get. So in any case, what you're asking for, or at least conceptually, it's a great idea. It's way past time, to put some restrictions on these things, just like we do on all these other, domestic, species of domestic animals. So that's my thought on the topic. But, again, it's because, people have been, or so many people have been conditioned to actually love dogs unconditionally. That's very, very difficult to do, unfortunately, and that's what you run into. So, and also, the Miami ban, I guess, has now been vacated at the state level. They passed some legislation here in Florida that vacated all the municipal bans that had been grandfathered in. I don't know if Miami's was the only one left. There might have been a couple of small towns that had them, because part of the initial agreement was, and probably know this, was that, the existing bans would be grandfathered in. right? If they had a ban. And the thing is, that talk about another bait and switch, that was only reason why like Miami didn't fight the preemption law back in the 90s, would say, okay, if you let us keep our ban or keep our ban,
Right.
you can go ahead with the preemption. That was the deal. But
Right.
now the pit bull people have come back and are like, oh, no. They're essentially reneging on, they're weaseling, they're welching, which is why, you can't really, negotiate or reason with these people, unfortunately. So.
I think that takes effect in October, maybe around October 15th, but it's coming up real soon. And there wasn't a lot of media about that, but I think that when it comes into effect on the October date, there'll probably be just overwhelming media reports about it. Finally.
Yeah, well, there'll be like a pit bull parade down,
Yes.
Main Avenue in Miami. I mean, the thing is too, again, with all due respect and everything, but a lot of it, as far as I'm concerned, it's really more a symbolic thing than a real thing, because I don't know if you've been listening to my monologues, but last year, and actually I talk about the Miami pit bull ban and the Florida dog politics quite a bit.
Yeah.
But if you go to and I've even blogged about this last decade, if you go to the Miami-Dade Animal Services, the city shelter, they were adopting these things out. Of course, they were terrier mixes or lab mixes or whatever, mislabeling they happen to come up with. So I don't know if it's really going to change much. I mean, it doesn't affect me because I don't live in Miami. So yeah, my neighborhood's full of pit bulls, and it's still going to be full of pit bulls. It really doesn't matter.
Right.
And they don't even need to hide the breed.
They actually changed the definition too, and really made it exceptionally strict. So all kinds of, they weren't even mixes. Okay. They were pit bulls.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were, because what was it, Dahlia, the one, big advocate down there for pit bulls, she had like 3 or 4 of these like blue pit bulls, and like, oh no, they're blue, they don't qualify, like, whatever.
Well, that's the thing is like you brought up the point, and I bring up the point too, is that I think that, placing the restriction on, one or a handful of specific breeds, it just makes it too easy to cheat, because they just gotta, they could just outright lie about it or mix it a little bit. Like you say, you'd want to restrict the phenotype.
Yep.
Right. Like, in other words, like, okay, if it's a revolting butt head, like if it has that big butt crack in its forehead, it's gone. You can call it a toy poodle. I'm joking, but like a phenotype is, well, could you explain that a little better? You could probably explain that better than I can.
Well, right. So it's the large dogs with the brachial skull is what you're referring to.
Yep.
So if you were familiar with it was Ohio combined with Virginia, 2 institutions study, and basically they said, there was a lot of mixed breeds in there. So they said that, okay, so pit bulls and mixed breeds are the top biters, but then they went further and looked at the skull shape and the weight. So 60 pounds and over, and the brachial is what you're going to get with a Mastiff, with a Rottweiler, with a pit bull, right?
Yep.
Although all of them have that. You're going to get the most severe bites. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's clearly, we know that bites, those bites by those types of powerful dogs, are going to be the most severe. I mean, what else do we really need to know? Or if we say something like, I don't know that I've ever seen legislation, I've heard talk of legislation that every single dog owner must insure. I'd be happy with that. I really would.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is one thing you could push, and you're right. It's the dogs. Well, it's a physical capacity, because even if you set the statistics aside, you look at these things, and again, no other domestic animal or no other animal periods even remotely like that is allowed to be kept as a pet. But you look at them, And I say, you look at some of these dogs, like these XL bullies. I know we wanted to discuss that also, but just look, if you would say you're an alien from outer space and you're just clueless about all of this, you look at it, it's like, okay, that animal could crush a bowling ball in its mouth.
Yes.
Is that really safe to have around? I mean, you would think no, but many people, insist that it is. But yeah, that's what you want to restrict. Yeah, particularly the size, the weight, I think, is important too. Yeah, because that way we're not endlessly playing the breed ID games. Maybe we could segue into the XL bully ban or the situation with the XL bullies in UK. Because I believe back in the 90s they banned, I think it was 4 breeds. It was American Pit Bull Terriers, Japanese Tosas, and 2 others. Maybe it was Praces and Dogos. I forget exactly.
And the Philip it's some type of Spanish Mastiff, something like that. Yeah.
So it was 4, but like Japanese Tosas. But in any case, but what happened was that again, there was I guess the breed definitions were very specific. So about 10 years ago, they started bringing in these XL bullies, and a lot of people were saying it's like, okay, pit bulls are restricted, but anybody can own one of these. That's what they said. They're like, aha, a pit bull terrier is whatever, 60 to 80 pounds, but my Rover, he's $150. What do you think of that? So they.
It was alarming that there because the XLs can look pretty different. Depends upon if more Mastiff is showing up in them or more Pit Bull or American Bulldog. But the one that was the last year, the real status dog, Beast was its name. It just so you're banning a dog that's looks exactly like this, but it's just smaller. But the big one isn't being banned. You're gonna have to look at that. I mean, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense,
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I think that size and weight restrictions are essential, because otherwise they're just going to keep doing that. I mean, I don't know what's a theoretical limit for the size of a dog. Could you have a dog the size of a hippopotamus? I don't know. Is such a thing possible?
I don't know. Look at the Hulk. I mean, I mean, that's the trend, right? So, one thing, and it's just related that I was reading recently, and it pertains to the XL bullies too, is that as humans, so we have selectively bred dogs, some breeds, to be more dangerous than they ever would have on their own, say, a wild dog, right? I mean, so we have so much power in producing even larger dogs than what we've got today, more powerful dogs, more aggressive dogs. And so it is, I don't know that there is a limit.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, you think about, I mean, some people have said, well, maybe they're at the limit. I don't know if I have the Share Up and I have Hulk Up. And Hulk is one of my muses.
Yeah.
And they talk about playing the breed ID game. It's one of my favorite, gags is to play the breed. If you can see him, over on the right here. So we've got Hulk with the owner or the one half of the couple that breeds these things. And these puppies are going to the tens of thousands of dollars.
Oh, yes.
It's very lucrative. But, I would say, okay, look at this. It's funny because it's endless breed ID game, but usually it's the pit bull lovers themselves that'll talk about how their pit bull is the best dog in the whole world, and pit bulls are the most wonderful dog breed on earth by far. But then they say when something bad happens, like when a dog that looks exactly like theirs is involved in a quote incident, they say, oh yeah, pit bulls can't be identified. That was just some identifiable breed one. But you could ask that, it would be funny. You ask them, consider this photo here, right? So you've got Hulk sitting next to this woman. You say, okay, is this a pit bull? And they would say, yes, that is a pit bull. It's a pit bull because it's behaving. See, he's not in the process of mauling that woman. But if he were to attack her, then it would not be a pit bull. Correct.
And it used to be that they were marketed as, the first XL bully was the 2014 Mia de Ruin. So that was really marketed as an XL pit bull, and those were different keywords, you know, on the web at that time. Now it really is the XL bully, right? So everything is sort of switched over, and yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing that the bully comes in 4 sizes, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, how do you even the UKC? It's hard. The AKC has not recognized it yet, and the Kennel Club and the UK has not recognized it yet. I just find it stunning that, well, they have to have 4 sizes because with 5 bull breeds mixed together to create these dogs, yeah, it could probably fall into a couple of, well, yours might be, you know, below 17 inches, yours might be above 20 inches. Let's see, the bull terrier and the mini bull. So we have some minis, right?
Yeah.
Those do exist. But I don't think that there's another category of breed that has 4 standards, and they want a 5th, the exotic. So there really are 5. I guess they'll get the exotic added to it. There it goes. The exotic's on the far right there. The one, the ones that are really bizarre looking. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything from the knees up is probably safe if you're attacked by one of these. I think, you know, some folks bring up the fact too, you know, breeding something like this qualifies as animal cruelty.
Yeah.
That's another, you know, issue here also. I mean, animal welfare is not my top priority, but, you know, it's something that, you know, if you're a humane person should have a concern with. And it's like, you know, they breed, but, you know, seriously, I mean, pugs are very similar. You know, they breed these things and they just have a short, miserable life, and it's not fair to the animal, really. But yeah, these toad line bullies, or I think they call them micro bullies, or, you know, pocket bullies. You know, maybe that's the thing. If they just keep breeding them smaller until they just disappear into a, you know, submicroscopic particle. We were snarking on that on the Discord a while back also. So they have the micro bully, but they have a nano bully that's maybe the size of a mouse, and then a pico bully that's, you know, the size of, I don't know, a gnat. just keep breeding them smaller and smaller.
It's amazing. I mean, whenever I have to do a deep dive into the XL bully community a few times a year, I mean, it always ends and just feeling terrible, because I'm having to look at the breeding lines, I'm having to look at the pedigrees, I'm having to look at, you know, listen to their conversations. I got to watch videos, and I'm like, it's very disturbing. And because again, it's not the animal welfare isn't necessarily a top concern of ours either, but you cannot ignore it. And some of these dogs, you know, I mean, even Nico, the one that killed Mia de Ruin, I mean, that breeder had hundreds and hundreds of pictures in his Instagram. I mean, there's like a several days before the fatal attack. You can see this dog. It's just so gigantic in the legs, and he's trying to go up a staircase, and it wasn't very possible. It was like, this is not humane. Okay.
Yeah, but that's interesting to me if you want to digress a little. So yeah, there has to be, I think, again, it's perfectly reasonable to set some limits on these animals in the community, because we do it for every other animal.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I can't have a pet tiger, unfortunately, the damn communists. But so it's like, yeah, so why do they get to own, you know, something like this, right? Like why is this acceptable, but all that other stuff isn't? You know, and of course, you know, the answer is, like I said, you know, essentially it's canine supremacy. You know, people are going to argue that, well, dogs are better than all those other creatures. Sort of gets into some of the basic premises of dog culture. Part of it too is I raise that issue. I would say, look, you know, something like this of any species really does not belong in a city or a crowded suburb, you know. But I think, unfortunately, many dog people don't like that, because they don't want their Great Dane or their Saint Bernard or their Rottweiler even zoned out. They don't want that to happen. But
right.
I think to get some traction on this is some people are going to need to shed some political capital. Because right now, I mean, the paradigm, such as it is, protects these things.
It does. It does.
So,
And
that's. Oh, sorry.
The owners know they go together. So even if you own a little puffy little white thing, you're going to want to, have every right possible for dog owners, right?
Yep.
So, they're all in this, and so much of the time we're not going to have a problem, right? I mean, outside of nuisance and things like that, but as far as danger, no. And there's just a lot of dogs you don't even think about. They're not even there really. And so there's a lot of dogs that just fit in normally with society. And then we have these edgy, extreme that don't, and that are constantly causing pressure. Or you have the owner with the 5 German Shepherds who won't keep them in her bookstore. I don't know if you heard about that in New York City.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, God. Jeez, that was crazy. And so, we get the bad owners with, say, multiple large dogs. And I mean, that's crazy tension making. And, that's the rub. It's there isn't tension in generally with dogs, that are behaving properly, or like you don't even notice them, or they're small or whatever. But when it's pushing that tension line, that causes so many problems.
Yeah, well, many dog owners, do, like to push those boundaries,
Yeah.
I think, and it's like with something like this is that you're gonna have to deal. That's the other thing too, is you're gonna have to deal with them in a very assertive way, because you're confronting some of the most aggressive, belligerent, and defiant people around.
Right.
I've even heard I don't know if this was in Miami, but some pit bull people will defy these bans intentionally, and they do it because they know that, I mean, the enforcement is very lax. The penalties are very small. So they parade their pit bull around for 6 months. And finally, the city says, okay, they impound the dog. They cite him the $500 or whatever. But then what do? Well, they get another dog, right? They get another pit bull, and they go on to social media and endlessly whine and moan about how oppressed they are. Now,
Right.
so, and the thing is that, so you're going to have to, that's why it's such a difficult problem to solve. One reason why it's a difficult problem to solve is you're going to have to really get a lot of traction, you're going to have to deal with them in a very harsh manner. I don't know how much of my, or these chats or my monologues you've listened to, but we're discussing like how are like gun laws enforced, like say National Firearms Acts violations, right? And because we were talking about too, is if somebody has a dog like this, you could say, okay, if you're going to ban these, what do you do when somebody defies the ban, or even maybe perhaps isn't even aware of it? What do you do with that person? And that raises a lot of issues. Also, it's like, is it simple possession of these things, to be criminalized? I think, I mean, if you're going to ban them or even have other provisions restricting them, I think it has to, because otherwise they're just going to, walk all over it. Which, raises the issue that too, is do we, we the people, do we really support that? Are we okay with it? Are we okay with, say, arresting somebody or even heavily fining them just for simply owning one of these things? Like, let's say you've got a dog owner who's they could be the most meticulous the dog owner on earth, right? And what do you do when they've got a restricted dog breed, when they're out of compliance with these restrictions, whether they're not carrying insurance, or it's not shipped, or it's not neutered, or even this have it all? And that's a very serious conversation that needs to be held also, right? Like if you compare it to, say, gun laws, like National Firearms Acts violation, those those penalties are very, very steep.
Yes.
Like say if you have a suppressor without all the proper, tax stamps and other ATF paperwork, you're looking at 5 years in federal prison. And a suppressor isn't a weapon. It's a muffler that you affix to the end of the barrel, right? I mean, by itself, it's harmless, but, the law says, if you want one of these things, you got to go through this whole long, drawn-out permitting process. And if you don't do it and you have one anyway, you're in big trouble, which is why, people typically comply with those things. I'm sure, some people cheat. And, of course, the dynamic of that is very different. But, like I said, there's a lot of sort of philosophical or ethical conversations, we the people have to have with ourselves, in regards to this, right? So, so do we want to like enforce these things that the same way would be effective, but many people would consider it, extremely harsh or even draconian to do so.
Right. I mean, there's infractions and sometimes there's a misdemeanor. There's a case right now in Prince George's County. I believe it is misdemeanor to have possession there. I'd have to look at that, but usually it's an infraction. And what I think is really interesting about the UK is that it doesn't matter how good of a dog owner you are. As long as your dog is dangerously out of control, it attacks someone in your home, in your bathroom, in your front yard, out in public, you are just as susceptible of being, you'll be charged.
Sure.
The degree is, a wide area, right? The degree, first time, offender versus a 10th time offender, things like that, or all these things are taken into consideration. But you will be charged with a dog dangerously out of control. I know that we couldn't really have that in this country. I wish we could.
We could. I mean, you could do it at the state level because a lot of it just comes back to, if you're going after, individual owners, which I think is essential. And maybe we could delve into what, we think are, next steps forward with this. But, I'm adamant about owner accountability. And, if you go, like you mentioned, like even if it attacks somebody, inside your home or on your property. I mean, even here, if you look at how do we manage similar things, right? Because they'll say, okay, let's say somebody is trespassing, they're shortcutting across your land and the dog attacks and they say, well, it's justified because he was defending his space or whatever. But you can't really do that with any other means.
No.
Like in my jurisdiction, I make that point often also because it seems like you could, at least in many places, you can only do such a thing with a dog. Like if somebody were shortcutting through your property and you were to say shoot them, you'd be potentially be in a lot of trouble because I've talked about, self-defense, statutes and so forth. Like in my state, you can only use lethal force if the person, one of two conditions is being met. Either they're in the commission of like a forcible felony, like say they're trying to forcibly rape somebody, or they pose some kind of mortal threat to you, like they're trying to take your arm off with a chainsaw, then you can use lethal force. But something, minor, like say, somebody shortcutting across your property, and most of the time these people aren't trespassing anyway, like say a UPS delivery person, or even a Girl Scout selling cookies. People, unless you've got a fence up and signs up that say, keep out, no soliciting.
Right.
People can, pretty much anybody can walk up to your front door and ring the bell, right? And so, you don't have, so essentially what they're doing is they're setting up lethal man traps.
Right.
And that kind of thing is illegal as hell. But again, there's like this dog loophole. If you have a dog, right, it's okay. And I think it goes back to what I'm saying is, that part of the problem with all this is that, again, the underlying assumption always is that the dog is right. So it doesn't really matter if you get your ankle nipped by a Chihuahua or you get decapitated by a bull mastiff. way too many people have been conditioned to think, well, it's just justified. But the thing is, yeah, if these animals are going to live in our community, they need to be held to our standards,
Right.
and the problem is, yeah, dogs don't understand self-defense laws or self-defense ethics. And I think, and that's a big part of this is that self-defense rights have been attributed to dogs. And I don't think that
Yes.
that should not have happened, because they don't know what the boundaries are.
Well, they don't.
So
They don't distinguish between the Girl Scout cookie or a thief either, right? Or
yeah, they don't.
So they don't.
Yeah.
And so, it is interesting that they have such special status and self-protection status too. It is very interesting. And you see it when there's a big attack. And it's so awful because, I don't know, someone walked near a property or something and this person was mauled to death. And people, these are just like all on social media. It's like, just doing his job, just doing his job.
Just doing his job. Yep, he's just doing his job.
Oh, geez. Like, and then of course, the other chorus is if you did that as a human, you'd go to jail.
You would, yeah. That's the point I make often. Yep, indeed. Yep.
You can't have man traps like that, yeah.
Yeah, you can't. It's you don't have. Well, that's what I said. I mean, they've attributed not just self-defense rights, but just because you have, and I'm actually a self-defense advocate myself, but you respect the fact using any force against a fellow human being is, the threshold is very, very high.
Yeah.
I would never shoot somebody for just shortcutting through my yard. I mean, even if I had the statutory authorization to do so, I still wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not, you don't go to that point for something that trivial. But the thing is that, yeah, I mean, they've attributed many rights to dogs, I think, inappropriately.
Yes.
And, really, and to hold a right, you have to understand how to properly exercise that right. And dogs don't know how to do that. So.
Right.
So that should never be an excuse. Self-defense, even if it is. Even if Jack the Ripper breaks into your house, I don't think the dog should be able to use. I mean, if the dog is defending the owner, maybe the owner could claim they were doing that. But, anything short of that, no, I don't accept that. And again, where this is coming from. I'm a self-defense advocate. I'm not one of those people who thinks there's no such thing as a valid self-defense scenario. There is. Which actually segues into another point, is that we, the people, the human people, have lost our self-defense rights. Because going back to what I was just talking about, like with the self-defense statutes in my state, that applies when one is using force against a fellow human being. But I did some further research and it found out that actually in Florida, there is no statutory authorization to use lethal force against a dog that's attacking you or somebody else.
Okay.
Now, it's not illegal, right? It doesn't say you can't do it. But it doesn't say you can. It's a gray area. So because I hear a lot of this, and you probably see a lot, get a lot of this also, the keyboard commandos. And they're like, yeah, man, I'm packing heat, man. I'm going to blow away some pit bulls, man. And I was actually on the band Pit Bulls Reddit, and somebody said, I responded. I said, you might earn yourself a stay in the Gray Bar Hotel if you actually try to realize this fantasy you have. Not that I think it should. I think somebody should be able to use force against a dog that's attacking them, particularly because, again, it's an animal. It's not a human with rights. But it seems it's the opposite. It's like the dogs have more rights than we do, which is ridiculous. But that's the thing. It seems like dog culture has, captured the larger culture, apparently.
There was a case up in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago, and it's one of the worst phone calls I get is from, it's usually a guy who has shot a dog when he's been prosecuted.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, call a lawyer.
Yeah.
And this was an interesting case. I think that so it was the DA who said that when she announced that she would prosecute this man for shooting this dog, she got more support in, say, social media than and all, all around than if she had convicted a pedophile and a 4-year-old. So she was even making the point, and I think that some of these prosecutions are highly political, and I don't mean
yeah. Oh,
guys,
totally.
I mean that just to win over.
Absolutely. Because, well, they're catering, we have a lot of these conversations about, dog politics, and
Right.
they definitely, are like if even you look at the Florida situation, the recent legislation. I mean, it was almost unanimous. Like the House and Senate have 160 members. It passed. I think it was 159. There was one holdout. Interestingly, the one holdout was a Democrat, but all the other Democrats voted for it. All the Republicans. In the House, it was unanimous. In the Senate, there was one holdout. Because I think they believe that, and again, I think social media is driving this. They see, or at least they perceive that, the electorate is very, very pro-dog. So they're like, yeah, we're going to get this evil dog hater. But that's what I warn people about. It's like even... And, self-defense discussions come up often, but
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, that's well, it depends on the circumstances. Like if I would not recommend just shooting, say, a trespassing dog. You could argue that, for example, particularly if it's some kind of known dangerous dog breed, I don't think if it's at large, if it's trespassing, I think you should be able to do what you need to, no questions asked. Okay. Now, but that's my opinion. It's not,
Right.
That's not how you're going to be treated in the system. Because, yeah, you've seen, we've all seen cases where somebody shoots or stabs a dog that's actually it physically it's like mauling them.
Yes.
And they get prosecuted, which I think is perverted. I think that's just grotesque.
It really, it's a scary. Like I wish, like that's when I wish I had been to law school, because I'm like you just want to help that person.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. One thing going forward is it'd be interesting to, set up a fund for people like that. Well, I was thinking it would be good because when was the last VC or the one before? We were talking about, taxing, these dog owners and, but putting the money in a fund for the attack victims, because they often you say, okay, well, I'm talking about all the costs. I mean, not just the medical costs, but you've got, lost productivity, lost quality of life, et cetera, as a result of these things. And a lot of times, the owner can't pay, yeah. They can't. It was, I don't know if you heard this, but it's worth talking about again. We had an incident just in my neighborhood earlier this year. Well, actually, it started late last year, and there's a home, not in my immediate neighborhood. I live on a street of like kind of middle of the road, single family homes. And if you go north a bit, it's kind of a semi-rural area. So you have, trailer homes and the like. And not there's anything wrong with that. But what happened was, the bottom line was, this one person had 3 pit bulls that were constantly running at large. And they killed a couple of pet cats. They'd attacked a couple riding bicycles. They weren't badly injured because they were able to basically use their bikes as shields to keep the dogs away. And they're frequently at large. The neighborhood was on essentially a de facto lockdown. Because people were saying, it's like, yeah, I'm afraid to walk my dog. I can't let my kids out into the yard. And of course, my thought is, this is not the first time something like this has happened around here. Talking about it being personal. And, my thought is like, we can't live like this. Okay. But what happened was, it turns out finally, and I wasn't part of it, but I've done this, I've gone to, animal control, police, even gone to court. to testify against dog owners. This case, I didn't do that because I hadn't actually witnessed anything. I wasn't part of it. But a whole posse of neighbors, about a half a dozen or so, went to court. They finally had a hearing after months of agitating about this. So the judge said, okay, you got to pay a $500 fine. You have to build a fence to contain them, and you need $100 or $100,000 bond, insurance policy on each dog. And don't quote me on that. But so I looked up, and we knew, because I was following this on Nextdoor. So I looked up the property. I know the address. So I look up the property, and the tax assessor had assessed the improvements, the home and the other improvements on the land at zero. So I'm thinking, if those dogs had really messed somebody up, they're not going to be able to pay anything. They're not, so I would think it would be good to. And people say, well, just, ban them all or whatever. But I think that the dangerous dog, paradigm really goes beyond, I think, just some basic animal control at this point. We need something like that. Yeah, we need a legal fund for people who want to sue, people who want to, defend themselves against, whether it's authorities or a dog owner that's suing them, things like that. I think that would be a really good thing to do. The problem is I personally, I don't really have the wherewithal to do that. I think we need somebody who's willing to be, a full-time, activist to head this up. And it was interesting. There was, I was in communication with somebody, it was a man from Missouri, I think, who had a background in political lobbying, setting up lobby groups. Because right now all the lobby groups represent our adversary. And I want to talk to you about those also, because apparently you're involved with some litigation involving some of them. But he said, yeah, it's just crazy. There's no actual lobby group, or probably the closest thing really would be what you do, because you actually have, a formal nonprofit organization and all that. So I was talking to him. I said, hey, you know what? If you want to, set something like this up, I'll support you the best I can. But then I guess they lost interest. I never heard from him again. But
we get interest like that. I mean, we'll get calls from DC, and I don't really spend a lot of time on them, because I know that they're going to get inside and be like, oh my God, there's no organization here at all, and this is huge. I'm out of here. So yep. I mean, that's what I've seen over and over again. So I don't invest a lot of time in people who contact me about that, because it's pretty overwhelming. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's as like I said, impacts a lot of people. I mean, with the dangerous dog thing, these fatal maulings are really just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, because like I just mentioned, it's like you've got people that are affected by this indirectly, because you've got, neighbor, like my neighbor. Well, actually, not only we took care of that. Now I've been seeing at the end of the block, I see this Mastiff and this Pit Bull running loose from time to time. I'm like, oh, great, here we are again. But the thing is, animal control won't do anything.
That's right.
Unless they're actually, at least here, unless they're actually if they're actually on your property or have been, the complainant can only be the victim or whatever, so, because they could just argue, it's like, well, maybe that landowner gave permission for the dogs to be there or whatever. Because again, the inclination is always to give not just the dogs, but the owners as much leeway as possible.
It's true about the owners, and as much leeway as possible. I guess that goes down to the AKC is obviously very, very active in protecting dog owners.
Yep.
But one of the things that I don't know if you've ever talked about this, but this idea, and a law just passed in South Carolina, it's interesting, about collective dog bites. So, okay, you're a bad owner, right? Everybody knows that, bad owners.
Yeah.
And you go out, you've got a couple of dogs, and they've bitten some people. Okay, you send them to animal control, they put them down, you get 3 more dogs, and they bite some more people. Yeah. And then you keep doing that, right? And so the collective bite would be attributed to the owner, not to the dog. And so the way we have it today is like, okay, which of the 3 dogs bit you? Because that's the one that gets the bite record, and the only one that gets the bite record. And when that dog's down, that bite record is gone, right? So, this whole concept of like blame the owner, and yet, you should have every single dog bite attributed to your record.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like any other crime, if you have like, I don't know, say like Jack the Ripper with a slasher or something. I know it's like comparing them to, say, guns or other weapons, the whole dynamic is completely different. But let's say that goes like we were talking about before, it's a bait and switch. Like they say, oh, well, more owner accountability is required, like in the abstract, until something happens, and then they don't want to do it. So, but I think, yeah, that's essential, because if you're talking about how we enforce other crimes, we don't focus strictly on the means, because I think that, again, if somebody's going to own really any pet, they need to be held accountable. And yeah, you would, because again, does every bite necessarily justify, life at hard labor? Like, not necessarily, but, you look at, the frequency of offenses, the severity of offenses, and so forth. And yeah, you let that stack up. I mean, again, in theory, I think it's a great idea. But you're right, they protect the dog owners.
Yes.
I think actually, because really this is more about dog owners, I think, than the dogs themselves, because they have this, a quote, a cough, a craven desire to, pursue these activities. So,
right.
Yeah. Not that, I mean, obviously the dogs are part of it. Like I said, I mean, I have Hulk back up on the screen. It's ridiculous that people can own something like this when the largest cat I can have is 20 pounds. It's absurd. It's a joke, right? But that, unfortunately, at least currently, that's the way it is. And I try to play up that point often, but unfortunately, many dog people don't like that, because they're going to say, well, dogs are better than cats. That's why we allow this to have this, discrepancy. So,
there's a law that passed in South Carolina recently, because it's one that I talk about, I just gripe about, and that why don't we have laws when 3 dogs, a pack, is loose? And everyone knows since childhood that a pack of loose dogs can be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to say, there's no breed, there's no nothing. It's just that it is a pack mentality.
Yeah.
And they passed a law, and I've just been so busy with my contract that I haven't been able to get to it. But basically, if it's at large in a pack and it's acting vicious, they can cease those dogs. And so even if only one of them did the actual bite, they're all going to get it, right? Like,
Yep.
It'll be attributed to all of them. So it was interesting, and because they're trying, I guess that they're having a stray, not a stray, their owned and loose dog problem there.
Yeah.
I think that is the direction. This whole like multi-dog household thing has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we're talking about like level 1 dog owners, that's sort of how I use the Sue Sternberg. That's like just about everybody's a level 1 dog owner, right? We teach them a few things, they come when they're called, and it's all good, right? We're not level 2, level 3 are going to get into like being in the dog training business and so on and so on. So you have a level 1 dog owner is not going to manage a relationship between, if they have 3 dogs, so they've got 3 distinct relationships, 1 for each dog, and then they have to manage the relationships between the dogs, right? And I guess if they were all really small, it would be okay, but it's often not the case. And then if those get out, it just should be, there really should be, anything that's involving multiple dogs should have a higher penalty. You have more responsibility when you've got 2 or 3 that are out and loose than if you have 1. It's an entirely different dynamic.
Right. Well, just like, letting Hulk run loose is probably way worse than allowing your toy poodle to run loose. I mean, really, no dog should run at large, but Yeah, some are worse than others. And yeah, it seems like the, well, yeah, you get into the whole dog hoarder, mentality. And you're right. I mean, and that's why a lot of places, restrict the number of dogs that can be in the home because they're trying to curb, these pack behaviors. Because even, a dog that might typically be pretty laid back can, revert to pack behavior when it's packed up with a bunch of other dogs. Actually, I related a story about that from my, my hike leading, experience. But that was from, actually, it was August 14th. I posted that. I won't, repeat the story. And it should be because, the bottom line is that, again, provided these things are allowed to be owned at all, right? I mean, you could say, yes, and some people misunderstand me, more than one thing can be true at a time, right? You could say, of course, it's the genetics. Well, of course, here you look at this, I have Hulk up. I mean, it's the genetics that, again, give him the mouth that can crush a bowling ball, right? That's genetics. And you also have the genetics also, affect the behavior. It's completely true. But you also got to figure, okay, who brought those genetics into the neighborhood, right? They need to own those outcomes, whatever it is, right?
Right.
And it could go, for pack behavior, because you could say, okay, like let's say if Hulk attacks somebody, I would say to her, hey, you own this dog, you own the outcome. And you could say the same thing for pack people. You had 8 dogs and they packed up and attacked somebody. If you had one dog, it probably wouldn't have happened. They have to, if they create these risks, they need to own them. They need to be, accountable for whatever outcomes are created by them. So that's a conversation in this that frustrates me. Not that you and I are having, I'm sure you and I agree on this, but more than one thing can be true at a time. So
it's interesting. I mean, I think that one of the real shockers after my own attack was realizing that there are so few protections.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, there's what I say often, there's a lot of protection for the thing, but very little from it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, I would have sort of these conversations with my attorney, just in shock. Like, what? You don't believe that it would be taken care of the way it's taken care of, which is not really taken care of.
Yeah.
Go to the hospital. That's one thing. So that feels normal. And then you get out and you realize, okay, you're gonna have to go to a dangerous dog hearing after a severe injury to get this dog put down, and then you got to do the civil lawsuit. I mean, all this stuff, and I'm like, well, but if someone had hit me with a baseball bat when I was walking down the street, they'd be in jail.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm like, wow,
absolutely.
unbelievable.
Yeah, well, the thing too is, and what's happened is, I think, and it's one reason this whole situation is so toxic is that you could say maybe dog ownership generally, but particularly pit bull and other murder mutt, the folks, are it's become sort of an attractive nuisance. It attracts the wrong people because a lot of people pick up on that because you can do things with a dog that you can't do any other way.
That's right.
So what that does is it attracts people to this space, and they're going to get one of these dogs, or perhaps the most dangerous dog that can be owned legally.
Yep.
And that's even provided they're even willing to be that that considerate, and because they know they can use it to not just, intimidate and harass and even injure people and get away with it. So actually, so what happened? So that no charges were pressed against that dog owner, the owner of the dog that attacked you?
Well, so basically, I didn't have an attorney when I got out of the hospital. It took me a little, 2 weeks or something like that before I hired one. And I wanted the dog put down. I did not want someone else hurt by that dog. Okay.
Yep.
And so I talked to animal control, and I think I might have still even been in the hospital, And I had asked her, well, has it been put down? She like laughed, like, no, it's not going to work that way. And so what she did, they sort of made this deal to avoid the dangerous dog hearing and all this. And that was that because of it was a public space, attack, that she could have been fined, say, a couple of $1,000s.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So would you rather have the dog put down or have her fined? Like she could go to the owner and say, we're going to charge you this fee, but we won't charge you this we won't give you this infraction if you agree to humanely euthanize. And so that's the deal I struck and didn't really know any better. And I wish that I hadn't done that, later,
Yeah.
I believe she should have been, I should have followed up and gotten that $3,000 fine. I don't even know if I even looked that up, and maybe it was, how fines add up. Okay, it wasn't neutered, it wasn't this, it wasn't, that might not, it might have been multiple tickets that accumulated to that amount. I'm not sure. But I wish that I had done that instead of agreeing to just put it down, agreeing for the trade, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the thing is like that's kind of, but what other laws, like you said, are enforced that way, right? Like, let's say, you pointed out, let's say they had just hit you with a baseball bat. They're thinking, well, we just, take the bat away, or should we, fine them a couple of grand? Like, what other like assault type laws are enforced that way? But I think that's the problem, though, is that this stuff, at least in most places, is not criminalized. Either they blame the victim or write it off as an accident. So
right, because it's not. How can a dog establish intent, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. Intent is the criminal, mind space. What was the intent? And so, and I certainly, I see the expression on police's face and different things like, yeah. So here's the way that a police officer could sort of think about a dog, is that you sick your dog on someone hears you, then that is intent. That's the clearest intent you're ever going to find.
Well, it's intent because, like I was saying, it's like who brought the dog into that public space? Like, why was the dog there? The dog didn't. I mean, if it was just maybe some feral dog, like without an owner, that would be one thing. But it wasn't. It was, it was a dog. It was, in the custody of a human owner. They brought it there. They chose those genetics. They chose to own those genetics. They chose to bring those genetics to a public space, and those genetics just sort of, acted out.
Right.
And it could be like anything else, but they try to, they say, you can't blame the dog because you're right. A dog, they do act with volition, but the fact that a dog is not a moral actor,
right,
doesn't really, it doesn't get the dog off the hook, right? You can't say, okay, we'll just turn him loose to attack more people. But the owner does. The owner has intent. It's probably, I would consider it reckless endangerment.
Right.
At best, if not. So, yeah. So like I said, too, it's more than one thing can be true at a time. So.
Right. It's absolutely true. And I mean, I think that, the day that I said, I'm going to make this felony dog attack page, it was the first time that had really been done on any website. And I mean, I reference it all the time. And I think that, I don't know if it's making a difference to prosecutors, but I think it's really nice to have them in one place and sort of have them, like the Texas law is very interesting because that has moved from when it was enacted in 2007 to very strict, must show previous, previous bite, previous attack, owner knowledge. And, through the court system, it's shifted into, it's much easier to bring a case down. If it wasn't secure and it got out and attacked someone, that's it, that's felony. So you don't have to, there's all these things that you don't necessarily, it's nice to have, you're gonna have a strong case if you do have previous attacks, but you don't have to. And so I like just to see how these things evolve and just state by state, I just really, finding these people and even misdemeanors are so ridiculous when so much injury is inflicted.
Yeah.
It's horrifying to most people, you know, that are on the blog or talk to me, like they cannot get over that a matter of death is accident. They just cannot get over it. But there's only a few things to choose from. It's homicide, suicide, accident, or unknown. So
Yeah.
what else do they choose? You know, I mean, we know it's not murder or homicide or suicide. And so I just, it's very upsetting for people. Like, how this is not an accident. I'm like, I know, but they don't have to choose from.
Speaking of that, I remember there was a case I blogged about last decade where a woman, and I think she was fleeing police, you know, the police were pursuing her and she jumped into, maybe not, I forget what the exact circumstances were. And she climbed over a fence into a backyard full of pit bulls.
Gosh. Oh, yes, I know the case.
And they mauled her to death. And I believe the cause of death was ruled a suicide.
It was. And the whole, well, you want to call it the whole movement, it's not that big, but it's just a wave of horror. Like, you've got to be kidding me. So she had taken some drugs or something like this, right? And then walked out. She had that fight with her fiance, had taken some drugs or drinking something, and she wasn't supposed to. And then I guess walked over there. And apparently you could really only commit suicide if you knew you're walking into two vicious dogs. So I can't recall that component of it, but apparently the coroner thought that. And I was like, wow, that is controversial. I mean, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, it goes back to, you know, what we keep saying or what I keep saying, or many of us keep saying, is that, you know, it seems the incentive, and it even goes back to collecting statistics, is to, you know, grant the dog and the dog owner, you know, as much leeway as possible. Right. Yeah. So rather than say, okay, this was this dog owner, I think the dog owner was a cop, I think, but
there was something going on there. Now they eventually both charged with some misdemeanors, but yeah, you're right. There was something.
The incentive is to, because again, everybody's been, you know, conditioned to love dogs unconditionally. So the incentive or the tendency is to give the dog and the dog owner as much leeway as possible. So what often happens is they try to, you know, attribute the death to something else, even if they have to do all kinds of ridiculous mental gymnastics to do so. It's like, oh, they walked into a backyard full of pit bulls. Well, it was, you know, a suicide. But that would imply that at least somebody knew that these dogs were deadly, right? If somebody puts a gun to their head and pulls a trigger intentionally, that's a suicide, because everybody knows a gun shot to the head can kill somebody.
Right.
So, but it's weird how this whole thing is a lot to unpack there. You're saying, okay, that this person knew or should have known that pit bulls are deadly. I guess that's the implications. They're ruling as a suicide, but so it's like they're trying to vindicate the dogs, but it also makes them look bad at the same time. Very, very bizarre stuff. And I would say too is, you know, that would probably be, you know, again, like I was saying, it's very unusual that you can, you know, employ lethal force against a simple trespasser, even if they climb over a fence. So I would say, yeah, you know, he had a lethal man trap in his backyard, and it indeed killed somebody. So that would be, yeah, you know, probably a negligent homicide. I don't know what you would call that exactly. It's not a murder, but it's not nothing either. So
no, it's not. And that I looked up that. I think I was so shocked by that coroner ruling, and I looked him up. So he was very controversial. I mean, some of that stuff gets really political, because you know how the coroners will get the Emmys will get in trouble if they're, like, you know, supporting police. You know what I mean? How so like it can get pretty controversial how they call things. But so he had that in his background, but still. It still shocked me. And there's stuff that we don't know, not reported in the media, of course. So it's a crazy case. Sad case.
Crazy stuff. I know, shifting gears, I know you're time limited. Did you want to discuss some of the legal harassment you've been subjected to?
Sure.
Yeah, I think you sent me some links. Let me see if I can find those links, if you don't mind, and bring them up. I don't know if you.
Probably an email I think I sent you. Yeah. So we had.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me drop. I'm going to drop the share just for a second, and then bring that up, and then I will. Let's see. Get my act together here. Just bear with me.
That's all right.
Yep. Okay. Need to know. Oh yeah. The ASAP pages. Let's see.
I think it was the early one. Yeah, I feel so.
Oh, the WVs, like the yeah, this one, the deposition. Can you still see my screen? Am I still sharing?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so take a look at this first one. So what's basically what's being expressed here? And maybe I'll say it as way because I just sort of skimmed through this. I don't know if I really fully unpacked or digested it yet, but apparently this city of Williston wants to, I guess they're looking at, they don't have a ban, but they want to institute one. Is that what they're trying to do?
So a specific pit bull group, so Animal Farm Foundation, which owns the other group that's involved, the National Canine Research Council, that's a subsidiary. So they're really one and the same. So they have been suing jurisdictions in the Midwest with pit bull bans to win these cases. So they're based on the unconstitutionality of the ban. They're based on discrimination. So and so they started about in Sioux City in and around 2016, and then these three cases that you're looking at all came out around the same time. So one in North Dakota and two in Iowa. So that it started with the written subpoena, and then of course the deposition followed. And so I am a non-party, and I am not involved in the cases. In this particular one, what you're looking at is North Dakota. So in the first two cases, those two Iowa cities actually shared the expert witness for the city. And she, in her report, she cites many sources. DocsBite just being one of those sources. So because she did, they which was our 15-year chart, they did this broad swipe of a 300-page subpoena, totally disproportionate, to get all the underlying data for that 15-year chart. So that's how it started. Now I was able to sort of like outrun those. And I hadn't known there was a third case coming, Williston. So Williston's expert did not cite us. So what happened there was that 6 months earlier, the way some of these lawsuits do start is that, okay, the pit bull advocate is at the city council meeting, and they're saying want to repeal, and city says no, and person says, okay, well, no, I'm not going to sue you. And so we had set a person who, a volunteer at DocsBite, had sent in, hey, to support their ban, and she did have the privilege to write on letterhead. She's a really great advocate, and it was just like a little note into city, hey, we support you. And then she had a page attached that had a printout of one of our stats, whatever. And then 6 months later, in and around that, the city was sued. And so because of this thing that was sent in by a volunteer, that they believe gave them a right to issue the same 300-page subpoena that they had tried in Iowa. So I did comply. I mean, I did have to do that.
So you were subpoenaed, in this case as a third party. Yeah. So what was the purpose? Maybe I missed something. What was the purpose?
We were not involved. The evidence of that the volunteers sent in, that wasn't part of the lawsuit. It wasn't part of the case. It had nothing to do with that. And their expert did not rely on any data from DocsBite.org either. So again, it's sort of like this broad, the universe of discovery, right? And Rule 45. And, you know, it would be one thing if I said, okay, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to pay that cost. And then, but guess what? They're going to file another lawsuit next year with a new set of plaintiffs, and they're going to do it again.
Yep.
So there isn't an end route, really. You know, and so, you know, they got the underlying data, and I don't know if they actually wanted it, or if they plan on doing something with it, or if they just, you know, wanted to, you know, cause me problems. I don't know. And then of course this deposition was 9 hours, right? So yeah. And so, you know, nothing to do, it had absolutely zero to do with the case at hand, zero to do with it. And they just wanted to, you know, interrogate me for 9 hours. So, and that's what they did.
Yeah, well, go with the case. It's like, you know, I'm confident that they're just using this as an excuse to harass you. Yeah. I mean, I'm 100% sure. You know, some folks in the space, you know, many folks like to stay anonymous, but some other folks are saying, well, you know, is it really necessary? You know, and they use you as an example and say, well, she uses her first name and shows her face, and this conversation came up, and I guess at the time I was having a big brain meltdown. I didn't care, but I said, well, fine, if you want to subject yourself to this kind of thing, because this goes back to a point I make. And even goes back, you know, people being prosecuted for using force against dogs, that the process is the punishment, right? Yeah. So they're just using this. They probably don't have a good reason for dragging you around like this, but, you know, well, it's probably in a way, it's metaphorically, it's like your actual physical attack. You know, the advocates of these things act very much like the dogs themselves.
It really is. I mean, it took me a really long time to sort of just digest how our legal system works and how it was possible, and how, you know, I could just keep turning around and around, and the people just keep coming. Now, we don't know that that's going to happen, because in October or November of last year, the 8th Circuit, you know, basically destroyed their legal theories. So these 3 cases were all under the 8th Circuit. And so this, technically, the Wilson case is still going on. It's at a stay, but technically it's over with. The other 2 are over with. And, you know, it's unclear if they're going to sue maybe in a different circuit. I don't know. Yeah. But they can't keep suing there if I mean, under the same theories, because those will just get wiped out too. So
it's Animal Farm Foundation actually, you know, launched this suit. We were talking about that group because they, for folks who don't know, you know, it's a dog advocacy group, but I think they primarily focus on defending pit bulls and other dangerous dogs. And, you know, they're well organized, and they often get what they want, you know. And this is a case where, they're just hoping to, you know, sort of, you know, grind you, you know, into dust, to, you know, wear you out. It's a war of attrition in a sense, you know. Yeah. So it's really, and it's terrible that they do these things, but it goes back to what I keep saying. It's like, you know, the adversary we're dealing with, they're just the worst people in the whole world. They really are, you know.
It's mind blowing. I mean, their mission statement is something like equal protection of pit bull type dogs. So I mean, they're very specific. They do not give grants out to anyone unless it's pit bull specific to benefit.
Okay, so they are very pit bull specific.
They very much are, and so yeah. I mean, it's sort of just an interesting phenomenon. You know, that is how dedicated they are, and you know, and of course they have, you know, I've had the .com domain name. We go back a long ways as far as having a long-standing dispute, so no surprises there. But it still, I think, is difficult to swallow, because you just really want to find a way out of it, and it's not easy. And It's not easy to, fight with, they've got 5 million, we make under 50,000 a year. So, that's not exactly an easy phenomenon to fight against.
Yeah, it's not. Well, like I said, the thing is that, we are right and they are not. So we have that going for us.
Correct. Yeah.
Because it's interesting, the legal, because I skimmed over some of the other documents, maybe I could bring that up, but just to discuss it, briefly, was it seems that, they're using 14th Amendment arguments in their case. And the 14th Amendment has a lot of clauses.
Yes.
I don't have my constitutions in the other room. How, and I'm not saying that they're right. Because I don't believe that it is, but in what way does a pit bull restriction violate the 14th Amendment?
Right. So, I was sort of concentrating on one of the big legal issues was, does the municipality have a rational basis, right? And that's not 14th Amendment, I don't believe. But the 14th Amendment was sort of like discriminating against these plaintiffs, discriminating against specific dog owners. And so that has not prevailed anywhere in any of these cases. And they are categorized as that. And maybe, and I don't know enough because I don't, spend a lot of time in that area, but is 14th Amendment also about seizure or anything about taking of?
Usually, mostly I know the 14th Amendment has a lot of clauses. This is a great conversation. Maybe we could do a deep dive into this some other time. But typically when people look about the 14th Amendment, and again, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I do, is you're talking about equal protection. Because I think you just touched on that. So I guess what they're saying is that, we pit bull owners are an oppressed minority because you're targeting us and not toy poodle owners. That's the discrepancy. But it goes back to what I say is that, really, we're talking about pet owners, right? We're not talking about, zoned out farm animals or anything like that. We're talking, the keeping of animals in communities, can be, like I said, pretty much everybody respects. It can be restrained by your lower jurisdictions, at least. Like, a nationwide ban might be unconstitutional, at least technically, but that's really not what we're contemplating here anyway. We're talking about a city. And I would think that so I guess, that's the claim they're making. They're saying, well, we're being treated unfairly or being subject to more rules than somebody else who is similarly situated. Right. That's the claim, I guess. But the thing is that really nobody has a right to own any pet. I think, in my opinion, one point I make, and that's, something, part of the philosophical or ideological conversation is owning a dog or any pet a core civil right, or is it a privilege? Right. Now, I say it's a privilege, which means that, if the jurisdiction can come up with a good reason for restricting them, it can restrict them. Again, that's why, I can have a house cat as a pet, but not a lion.
Right.
Because owning any cat is a privilege. And that's why, we limit cats to, relatively innocuous creatures. If my cat had opposable thumbs, she would probably shoot me, but she doesn't, so it's irrelevant, right? But I think what needs to be done is, like I said, it's attack the underlying philosophy. And again, but many dog owners find what my position offensive. And I've had these conversations. I say, because they say, like, on one hand, if you insist that owning a dog is a right, then these equal protection claims kind of make sense, if that makes sense. And you could restrict rights too, but the threshold for doing so is very, very high. Imprisoning somebody. You can't just throw somebody in jail because you think they might have done something. You have to, prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did this terrible thing. But because again, freedom to move about and participate in society is a right for human beings, not necessarily for dogs. But I guess, yeah, they're claiming that, we as this group, as a subset of dog owners are being, unfairly oppressed somehow by this. So.
Yes, and if you look at the constitutionality page and you see, how many rulings there have been that supported these upheld, not supported, but upheld brief-specific laws, you would see that equal protection is an argument in every single one of those cases, and they always lose. So
yeah.
It's not new. It's like vagueness. The ordinance, the language is not vague, So I mean, maybe there was one or two in the vagueness way a long time ago when people were starting to write ordinances, but generally most of the stuff that's litigated about in these cases, the same thing, slightly maybe different verbiage, but really the same legal concepts over and over and over. I mean, since the 1980s.
Yeah.
And so it's, now it's the 14th Amendment evolves. I mean, there's different court rulings, and so maybe they felt like, they've tried this again because maybe they felt like, a door was open or something. But it is interesting that these cases are always used the same arguments, and these cases were interesting too because they wanted to prove that pit bulls are not dangerous in a court of in a federal court of law, as opposed to say, when you want to repeal, you go to the state legislature or you go to the city council to repeal. You don't do that in a court, right? So there's a lot of, I mean, for whatever, I didn't say that I understand their strategy, I don't, but they really wanted to fully litigate one of these cases, and the fact is they almost never get to because the city will win summary judgment and rational basis, these things that prevent it from going to trial, right? Eventually. I mean, they'll go through all sorts of discovery and all of that, but then at the end, summary judgment will come, and so they can't have their day in court. And so it seemed like they really wanted to litigate one of these cases all the way through, but that did not happen. So that must be still on their mind that they want to try that somehow.
Yeah. Well, I think based on what you said a little bit earlier, I mean, I think their strategy is they're just going to keep at this until finally they can find a judge somewhere to rule, right, yes, discriminating against pit bull owners is unconstitutional.
Right.
Right. Because they are indeed an oppressed minority.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess too is they'll just keep doing it, and that may happen. But yeah, they're just going to keep, because, they're well funded. They're very determined. They're ideologically driven, and they're just going to keep at it. I think it's their strategy. And that's, but that, to think about, I mean, that's always been the sort of the backbone of the rhetoric is that these kind of restrictions are bigotry, right? They're racist. They're, it's fascist, which is, I mean, is stupid, but and would also raise the issue. It's like, okay, who or what is the object of the racism? Because I know when I first started hearing these claims, you say, okay, a dog is not a person, which goes back to the point. It's like, meaning that yes, they can be restricted in the community. So a dog is not a person, but it seems like, we're talking about shifting. It seems the narrative has shifted more towards it's discrimination against the owner.
Yes. It is. That's exactly what happened.
Not so much the dog itself. They're saying that, well, I mean, I bring up the point too, is that, dogs are a religion for many people. And maybe that's where this is going is that they're going to saying, look, pit bull, if the toy poodle people have a right to their religious idols, I, the pit bull owner, do also. Right. So it'd be more like discriminating against, say, Jews or pagans or something, in a sense. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
No, that's interesting. That's interesting. But yeah, it really has. The lawsuits are about the owners. Yep. When the term racist comes up, and I don't know. It's because if no one can have one, I don't know why that's racist. I mean, no race can have one. If
Right, exactly. Well, I've said too in monologues, it's like, because I brought that up, because well, it seemed like though earlier, when I got into the space, it was bigotry aimed at the dog itself. And I think in my Mudheads 14 monologue, I went through that, and they would have these montages or these collages of all these pit bull type dogs, and they'd have all this, it's social justice vernacular, racist, bigoted, discriminatory and so forth. But yeah, it seems it's kind of shifted away, or maybe it's another one of those bait and switch. It sort of goes back and forth. Well, it's discrimination against the dog when that suits their purpose.
right.
Or it's discrimination against the set of owners when that suits their purpose. But yeah, so it kind of oscillates. Although now it's like they're complaining, and I made the point too. It's like owning a pit bull. You can say maybe it's against the perceived group of people that owns them, and it seems to be if you want to restrict pit bulls, you hate poor. Well, they use class issues too. You hate poor non-white people.
Right.
That's really what it is. Is that's just a thinly veiled discrimination aimed in that. Like you really don't care about the dogs that much. It's those people. Though I think most pit bull owners or at least a plurality of them are probably middle class white people.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, and dog ownership too is, it's primarily a white thing. I think that Hispanic has increased pet ownership. I think in the last sort of annual survey that the AAP, the big gigantic pet products company does, that's growing. But white is just so dominant in pet ownership and dog ownership specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, that's the kind of thing, but I don't know if it's necessarily call it like racist or bigoted, but it almost seems like the direction this is going in it almost seems more like it's like a religious discrimination or discriminating against people based on, ideology or maybe gay people, right? It's more that kind of, because, owning a pet is a lifestyle choice. So you're discriminating against people for that type of preference. Or it could be like more akin to, like I said, discriminating against people of a certain religious background, sexual orientation, maybe, gender orientation, that kind of thing. I think it's all BS, but I find this interesting because I've always been fascinated by, political narratives and social narratives and things like that. So I find it maybe morbidly interesting, this whole conversation. But it'd be interesting, to do is to say if one of them makes a claim, it's like, look, I'm literally an animist. I worship these things. That's my idol of worship, and you can't take it away.
Right.
It doesn't happen. The thing is now that, okay, maybe I should edit this part out. Now that I've said it, they're like, wow, that there's an angle we can work. Let's do that.
It's interesting because it seems as if it could be a possibility out there in the future.
Yeah.
We see it. There's a case in Nebraska right now that's sort of interesting. It was an emotional support dog. She moved from somewhere in the Northeast down to this Nebraska town, and they said, "Oh, by the way, we have a pit bull ban." And so she flipped out, but it's my emotional support. So then it became a service dog, and then but she's using sort of arguments of a little bit of what you're saying, that might work for her. I don't know. We'll see. She's on pro today, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, that's a whole service. Well, that's a whole other angle to this thing. Is a whole ESA and service dog scenario. But I think that I'm not saying I agree with it. I always try to think about, okay, what's the other person's, or what are they trying to say? Really, they get these things to terrorize and intimidate other people. I think that's where most pit bull owners are coming from. Some of them are just impossibly stupid, but they want to keep these things. It's a way to, legally, harass and intimidate and even injure people. But I could see that it seems that that's where it's going, is it the political angle is, it's like, look, we're a group of people with a particular lifestyle choice.
Right.
Right. Like, practitioners of a certain religion or transgendered people or that type of thing. Right. And you're discriminating against us based on that lifestyle choice. The difference is, I mean, if it's a religion, and you could say, okay, we have a right under the First Amendment, maybe they'll make that claim. But the thing is that still you can only pursue those things to the extent that they don't cause injury to others. Like a human sacrifice cult would not be protected under the First Amendment, or I would hope not.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really interesting stuff. So.
It is. I mean, it is. I hadn't really thought about some of those things that you're talking about. It is interesting because it could go there. It could go there.
Yeah. Anyway, I think you had, I was going to, usually I try to keep these things on. Actually, I think are we at 2 hours?
We're just about, because I've got, so 10 minutes.
You got to bounce. Yeah. And usually I don't like to let these things go long. Some people have said, could you keep it to an hour? And I say, well, I keep these things as long. I mean, you could, again, these are, YouTube videos. You don't have to listen to the whole thing at once. If you just want to consume it an hour at a time or a minute at a time, just do that, whatever. But I get to the point too where it's like I'm saying, you know what, I've had enough of this for today. I need to go find something else to do. But so anyway, yeah, I'll wrap it up. But Colleen, thank you so much for joining. This has been great. We have these calls. If I want to just have a call just with the two of us at least this one time. But we have other calls in the Discord. Maybe if we think of some more things to talk about. One topic I'd like to table for later is like steps forward.
Yes.
Like what do we do now? Because it seems like a lot, like as you mentioned earlier, I think there's been some progress in the cultural space, perhaps. But there's still like some losses in the political and public policy space. So maybe talk about maybe a good way to approach that. I'd like to talk about that. Definitely. So
Definitely.
Anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up. So folks, thanks again to Colleen for joining. This is Animal Uncontrol. And as always, people first. Thanks again, Colleen.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Talk
Good
to you
weekend.
later.
Okay.
Sure. Bye.
Bye.
Catch you later. Bye.